Hello, DragonCon. I'm your host, Cody, and this is another session of Q&A with a track director. Today we're talking to the science track director, Steven. Hey, Steven.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate your time. So,
Glad to do
this
it.
year's science, or first off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How long you've been going to DragonCon? How long you've been involved with DragonCon?
Sure. I've been involved in Dragon Con for, oh gosh, about 10 years now, sort of by accident. My background is I'm a physicist who moved to Huntsville, Alabama after I graduated to get a job because I like money. I can trade money for things that I can eat and wear. That's always nice. And I had some friends who had been volunteering for Dragon Con for a while, and they said, "Hey, you should come hang out. My background is not only in physics, but I've got an undergraduate degree in theater arts, which seemed like a really cool idea. And then I decided, again, I kind of liked money and wanted to be able to earn some of that. So I still had this sort of theater background, AV kind of things. And they said, hey, we do work for Tech Ops, the technical operations folks at Dragon Con. They're the ones that work on lights, they work on sound, they do all of these kinds of things. And I was like, well, I've never been to a convention. It sounds really nerdy, says the physicist. I don't know if I could do that. That's really nerdy. But I'll try it. So I ended up going and just having a great time at the convention, a great time volunteering. So I did that for a bunch of years until one of the past science track directors said, I hear you're a physicist. Could you talk about physics? Which is the point that I started sort of transitioning over to doing panels and doing presentations and things like that, and eventually shifted into that being more or less my full-time con thing and stopped doing things with Tech Ops. But it's kind of like the mob. Every time you think you're out, they pull you back in. They asked if I would be the science track director this year, and after thinking about it really hard, I was like, yes, yeah, I think this would be really cool. So cool. That's my short Dragon Con journey from volunteer to volunteer.
So this is your first year being science director?
Yes.
Wow, cool. Real quick, I forgot to mention for anybody viewing live, in the bottom left-hand corner, right about here, of your screen, there is a button or an annotation that says you can be a part of the conversation, and if you click on that, you can ask questions live, and we'll try to answer them on the Hangout here. So, can you give us a bit of a preview of maybe what's to come this year?
Sure. So the science track is, again, in the Hilton. I think it's room 202, down the hallway that they've sort of called the reality tracks, since science is down there, podcasting, the skeptics track is down there, space is just up the hall. I think the Maker's Robotic got big enough that they got moved to Sheridan, so more space a little further away. But there's a lot of it's going to be the same. We're going to have a lot of the same kind of different scientists coming in and talking about their research or things that they think are cool. We'll have some pop science talks. For example, we have Dr. Eric Spana from Duke, who is a geneticist, coming in and talking about the genetics of the Harry Potter wizarding gene. Because if you look in the books, there's information about how wizarding is passed on along in families, and so he's going to talk about genetics and what can we infer from what we see in the books. We're also adding some new sort of bigger events, especially in the evening. One of the things that I wanted to do is transition from sort of the more heavy science kind of stuff during the day to more pop science and entertaining science in the evening. So, for example, Friday night at 10, we're going to have a panel called Nature is Kinkier Than You. I've got a lot of biologists coming to talk about the animal kingdom and how mating works there, and how we think we're all amazing with our polyamory and things like that, but the animal kingdom kind of got there first. Saturday night.
It should be noted that all these times are subject to change.
Yes, absolutely. This is what we know right now, and with luck it won't change.
Right.
So as always, check your Daily Dragon.
Right.
But Saturday night we're planning on doing the bad science of sci-fi movies, because of course there's a lot of science and a lot of misapplied science in sci-fi movies. So we've got a special guest star, Sharknado, and I've dragged a lot of people who are marine biologist types. David Schiffman, who is a marine researcher and who tweets at Why Sharks Matter, just so that you know what kind of thing he's studying. Rachel Pendergrass, who comes from the Georgia Aquarium and the work that she's done there. And I've got some other people who are quite adept at mocking bad movies, Dr. Rubidium, Lolly DeRossier, folks like that, to take that apart. And then Sunday, and I'm super excited about this, we're having a science variety show. Science puppets, science skits. We're going to make actual scientists from the track do a talk to PowerPoint slides that they've never seen before. It's PowerPoint karaoke. And the best ones of those will go onto a quiz show. We're going to have live science storytelling. We have Amber Nash. We have Pam from Archer, who's going to be taking part in it. It's going to be crazy. I'm really looking forward to it.
Who put these PowerPoints together?
That's one of the things I'm going to be doing coming up, is pull up some graphs from other random papers, different charts, different bullet points, and the participants aren't going to know what kind of science it's going to be, what the graphs are going to look like, and so they have 3 minutes to essentially improvise a talk to slides they've never seen before.
That sounds great. That sounds like a can't miss right there.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So what are some panels that you typically almost always have that are just fan favorites that you're going to be carrying over this year?
Sure. So we've got, for example, a lot of times we've had a lot of nuclear power and some fusion talks. We'll be having some of those again. One of the long-running things that the science track has been doing, the Evil Geniuses for a Better Tomorrow, that had been running for about 10 years, and in talking to the previous track director, he was looking at moving that into more of a hands-on kind of thing. So I've gone ahead and followed up with that. So we're doing hands-on science instead, hopefully on Sunday morning. Sunday's going to be really busy for us. We've got a lot of stuff going on. But we've got a number of familiar faces who are going to be coming back. We've got Richard Alstead, who has talked a bunch of times. We've got Chad Ramey, who is the man who, when he was 17, decided to build a fusion reactor. So he's going to talk about how you build one if you, too, would like to build a fusion reactor.
I would, actually.
It's just, in your basement, as long as you don't do like the nuclear Boy Scout and get a lot of radioactive stuff in you.
Right. So what guests pertaining to the science track this year that have already been announced are we expecting to see?
One of the big names that just got finalized, I'm very excited about it, is Paul Zaloom, who most people are going to know better as Beakman. He was man behind Beakman's World, and he will be doing some performances as Beakman and talking about that. He also has a background doing puppetry and doing social satire, so he's going to be doing some stuff for the puppetry track. He's going to be part of a panel on the science track talking about how we talk about science when you're not in a classroom setting. It's called Science Doesn't Have to Mean Lecture, because there's so much more to communicating science than just sit down, here's your textbook, we're going to teach you about it. So we're going to have people who do science songs. We've got Larry Morris from Emerald Rose, who has science songs. He'll be talking about that. Donna Governor, who is an educator, does a lot of hands-on stuff. Lolly DeRossier, who's another instructor. A lot of good people talking about how we do those kinds of science. Another person that we've got coming, I'm very excited about this, is Annalee Newitz. She is the editor-in-chief in IO9 and has written a book about, all right, if an apocalypse did happen, how are humans going to survive it, called Scatter, Adapt, and Remember. And
particular apocalypse or just basic apocalypse?
All the different apocalypses. She goes through a bunch of different scenarios, and she talked to a lot of different scientists doing research in areas that have relevance to that. Good. And so she is quite ready to talk about the end of the world, and most of us are going to die, but humanity will probably struggle on. So cheerful thoughts.
Hopefully we'll have to go to space for that one, won't we?
Quite possibly.
So are you doing
underground?
Yeah. So speaking of space, are you doing any kind of cross things? Because space kind of, space and science go hand in hand. Are you doing any cross things with other tracks?
We are. So in terms of the space track and the science track together are working on the hands-on science zone that we're going to be doing. We're going to have some space-themed things, a number of more space-centric guests like Ariel Waldman, who did the Space Hackaday kind of things, Dr. Pamela Gay, who's an astronomer, does a lot of hands-on and a lot of citizen science kinds of things. Dr. Nicole Gugliucci, who's also another space person, Les Johnson, who's a NASA person who has written some really good nonfiction books. He's going to be talking about those. And then there's a whole lot of sort of cross-track things going on because there is sort of the pure science, but then there's also the science behind different pop culture things. So, for example, I'm doing a talk about the science of Pacific Rim. Okay, maybe we can't build giant robots yet. Well, why not? How close are we? What are the real sciences that get us a little closer?
Right.
We've got, I think actually Eric Spana is going to be over in the video game track talking about the world building behind Mass Effect and talking about how there was a whole lot of good scientific thought that went into how the different races are portrayed. One of our guests, Liz Heineke, who is the kitchen pantry scientist, she does a lot of stuff about just simple hands-on science, is going to be, she's a biochemist, she's going to be over at the YA Lit track talking with some of the authors there about how do you do realistic science for YA literature that still tells a good story and is still entertaining. So there's a lot of sort of that communication back and forth going on, both on the science track and on other tracks where they're going to be having science components.
Right. So I'm going to take a question from someone that's submitted one. Again, if you want to submit a question, in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, there's a be a part of the conversation annotation. You just click that. You can ask us a question, and we'll try to answer it live here. So the question is, what would be your favorite bad science bit?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I'm one of those people who generally can really roll with bad science in movies if it has a purpose, if there's a reason for it. And there are a lot of times, like, for example, sound in space. There is no sound in space, but you know what? It's a lot more exciting if there's sound in space. Let's just roll with that.
Unless it's why.
Yeah, the things that I tend to get really frustrated about are when it's bad science and there is no real reason for it, or it's something that not just a specialist like me would be able to look at and say, well, wait a second, that's really weird. That doesn't make sense. So one of my examples there, did you ever see the G.I. Joe movie, the first one?
Yeah, I did.
That's what, you can admit it. We're all friends here. Own your shame. I saw it as well.
Only because of the name.
Yes. There's the part where the submarines are underneath the big pack of ice, and so Cobra's going to take care of them by blowing up the ice, and then the ice is going to fall through the water to spear the submarines. Wow. So I don't know if you've ever had a glass of water with ice in it. If you notice what happens with the ice, kind of floats, doesn't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, that's really basic science that everyone has had experience with, and in fact is one of the reasons that we have life now, is the fact that ice, when it freezes, doesn't freeze from the bottom so that you would fill up a lake with ever-freezing water. You get an insulating layer on the top. I don't know. It's stuff like that I get really kind of frustrated about, but I sort of have to do the Mystery Science Theater theme in my head. You know, if you're wondering how he eats and breathes and other science facts, just repeat to yourself, it's just a show. I really should relax.
Right, and it's also for the entertainment value, because sometimes you need that for entertainment purposes. I just want to confess one of my pet peeves, and you mentioned it already, but about Pacific Rim, was the whole EMP not affecting analog or digital. What?
Right.
That's my personal ones.
That was one, as much as I loved that movie, they got to the point where the EMP wasn't bothering Gypsy Danger because she was analog. I was like, okay, no, and also no. Just no.
So we got another question here. It's going to be, are there any science panels or science events planned that would be aimed at kids or teen audience members?
The big one that I would point to is our Hands-On Science Zone on Sunday. It's designed to be an all-ages event. It's designed to be very accessible. Um, Essentially, no real science knowledge is needed at the beginning. It's not like you have to come in knowing stuff. The idea is we're going to have a bunch of neat scientific principles that we can show you. We'll extract DNA from strawberries.
Wow.
We'll show you how you can make fossils out of coffee grounds and talk about how fossils are made. We should be making liquid nitrogen ice cream. If we're lucky, we'll have a hoverboard. That should be fun. So a lot of neat little scientific principles, chemistry, physics, genetics, all those kinds of things. It'll be Sunday, at least right now, starting at 10 in the Sheraton and the Atlanta Ballroom, the imaginatively named Atlanta Ballroom.
10 a.m. Right?
At 10 a.m. Yeah, not 10 p.m. That would be a little more difficult for kids and teenagers.
Right, right. So you already, all right, I'm going to take another audience question. You already kind of touched on this about the Harry Potter and genetics and Harry Potter, but what panels are you most excited about for the science track this year?
Oh, wow. It's like picking your favorite child, isn't it? There are a lot of things that I think are going to be a lot of fun, are going to be informative. I like the fact that, for example, we're having a science in the media talk. So we've got a bunch of people who work at that intersection, like Annalee Newitz. We'll have Jonathan Strickland, who does the Forward Thinking video podcast for How Stuff Works. We'll have some of the science folks who also deal with media exposure, like David Schiffman, the shark researcher who has to deal with Shark Week every year, or Dr. Pamela Gay, who does a lot of astronomy and astronomy outreach. And so get to talk about that sort of intersection, about where science gets turned into media and gets reported, so that you get clickbait headlines or misrepresented studies, and why it turns out it's really hard to talk about science to a lay audience. And I think there's a really interesting discussion to be had there with people more on the science side and more on the media side. So that's an example of a panel that I'm really excited about. Beyond the evening entertainment kind of stuff that I mentioned, like the PowerPoint karaoke stuff and the bad mock the Sharknado. I like the fact that we're going to have, for example, Matt Lowry talking about the multiverse theory of quantum mechanics and cosmology, and what is the idea of multiple universes, and how does that come? So that we'll have some very sort of deep scientific stuff presented at a level where it is entertaining and informative, and you can come away both having enjoyed yourself and secretly maybe having learned something at the same time. We've got a lot of stuff all across the track. We've got a virologist talking about SARS, MERS, and rabies, and how bats are the sort of common carrier for a lot of those things. We've got someone talking about how you can look at energy. Of course, this is something that's really vital right now in terms of current energy sources, alternate energy sources, nuclear energy, and talking about how you can look at them and sort of judge, am I using more energy to make that energy than I am getting from that energy that I get? Just a lot of cool stuff. Medicine, psychology, genetics, physics, all the science that we could cram into the weekend. I'm very excited. It's possible I will be dead by Monday evening.
Oh, aren't we all? Well, we all will be. There's just not enough time in the 4 days to fit as much as you could talk about.
No. There will be times, like, for example, during the hands-on science zone, we'll also be running more, I don't want to say advanced, but more deep dive science talks in the track room at the same time, just because there's so much that we're trying to do, and I want there to be as much of a chance to reach folks as is all possible.
Right. So here's another question. These kinds of facts aren't usually at many sci-fi conventions. How do you think people respond to them?
That's a really good question, because a lot of times when I started reaching out to people and scientists and saying, hey, why don't you come and talk at DragonCon, the reaction was like, it's a science fiction convention. It's people dressing up and Harry Potter. Why would I come and do that? I think there is, at first blush, this sort of idea that they're two separate things, and possibly they're at loggerheads, like they're antagonistic. You've got science and you've got science fiction, and they fight. But I really don't see it that way. I see this as a really exciting chance to go to people who are already kind of science curious. A lot of folks who are into science fiction and into fantasy are also kind of curious about how the world works. And as someone who's done his share of time teaching in a classroom, one of the hardest things is to get people excited about the subject. Well, in a place like DragonCon, the folks who are coming to a science panel or a space panel and are not going to stand in line, say, to see Captain Picard, you've already got them enthusiastic and interested. That first part of the hard work is done. And what I've seen over the years of giving these talks and talking to people who've been involved in the science track as well is that it's a really enthusiastic, science-interested audience. I feel like a lot of it is if you treat people with respect and you respect the fact that they are interested, they may not know a lot of science, but they're interested in science, then you really can sort of establish a rapport with them and have some really good talks and get a really good reaction from those kinds of panels and those kinds of discussions. So I think people respond really well to having these more fact-based tracks, even in a supposedly fiction-based convention.
Right. Still taking more questions from anybody that wants to ask a question. Again, bottom left-hand corner, click to be a part of the conversation. You can ask a question. We might be coming around full circle again, but I'm going to ask it again because this is a question. Are there any shows or late-night panels we should be on the lookout for? You talked about your Science Zone, but are there any other late-night panels that you might want to highlight?
I am in love with the Nature is Kinkier Than You panel, just because it sounds like it's a really sort of kind of subject, but there's a lot of really cool science behind how the animal kingdom has evolved these different mating rituals, different appendages, different approaches to these kinds of things. And it's interesting to see evolutionary pressure, how that sort of came out at one of the base drives of any creature, which is reproduction and the desire to further the species. That one is definitely going to be one of those, 18 or older, sorry, we're going to be talking about sex and science, but also sex.
So that one's going to be ID checked then?
That one is going to be ID checked, yes, for that very reason. But I love having a place where we can come and talk about these kinds of topics that otherwise might be skirted around. I know, for example, from talking to my friends who are high school teachers, this is a hard subject to address in school. A lot of people never really learn anything about it because of the delicate nature of a subject like that. Well, here at DragonCon, we can say, here's what we're doing. We're going to check your ID at the door, but we're going full bore, and it's going to be funny, and it's going to be scientifically accurate, and you're going to have a great time and also learn something about things that in a normal educational setting would be a lot harder to deal with.
Great. Here's another question. It says, how will you know or judge the success of the track programming this year and then therefore carried on the next year? Or basically, what's your thought processes behind coming up with these tracks, or what to talk about?
Yeah. So coming in, I sort of looked at what the track had been doing in the past years, and it sort of fell into three broad categories. So sort of hardcore science, we're going to talk to you about a specific science topic. Pop science, that's sort of like Lawrence Krauss's The Science of Star Trek, or My Science of Pacific Rim, The Science of X, where you're talking about a pop culture topic and tying scientific ideas to it. And then third is sort of science education and science outreach. So what I tried to do is go through and continue that practice of having all of these kinds of different topics in these three broad categories, and so tried to balance among all of those. The way I'm going to judge the success, well, first of all, is just to be watching on social media, see what kind of response we tend to get from that. I've tried to make certainly my address as public as possible. We now have a Facebook page for the DragonCon Science Track. There's a Twitter account. We're going to be paying attention to that and trying to see what people's responses are in as close to real time as you can get when you've got 60,000 people pounding the cell networks and the cell.
So you yourself might not even have access.
It is possible that T-Mobile will fail me
Yeah.
for the last time.
That's actually a great segue, because another question is, how can people contact you, or what can they look at to keep track of what all the Science Track's doing? So let's, I guess, start with all the handles. Twitter handle.
Yeah, so this is where I'm really going to pull it up and make sure that I don't get this wrong, because then I would feel like an idiot. So our Twitter account is the DCON SciTrack, DCON SciTrack. Our website is science.dragoncon.org. That's undergoing a bit of a facelift. We don't have all of the information up there, but by the time the convention rolls around, we'll have links to Facebook, we'll have links to the Science Track and all of that. There is a G+ page for the DragonCon Science Track, and heaven help me if I know how G+ URLs work, because those are always sort of weird and fascinating to me. The Facebook, like the Twitter, is DCON SciTrack, so you can find us on all of those, and we are monitoring, we are listening, and we are doing everything that we can to be paying attention to that.
For the viewers out there, I will be putting these on in the About section and annotations at the end of this conversation.
Great, thank you.
And you've already also on your website, science.dragoncon.org, you've already posted a preliminary track schedule if people want to look at that.
Yes, it is worth the electrons it's printed on. It will look mainly like that, but as those of you who have been to DragonCon before know, everything is subject to change right up to the last minute. So the Daily Dragon and the DragonCon app are both great ways to check on that.
It's not definite until the track or until the panel is actually over. So
right. And sort of looping back to the previous question, another way that we're going to be judging the success of the panels is going to be to look at the DragonCon app. That has places where people can give feedback, can rate, 1 to 5 stars, which is useful. Most useful is comments that get filled into the comment blank. One of the things that I inherited coming into the track was the list of panels from last year and every single piece of feedback that people gave via the DragonCon app. So I could look and see, oh, this is what people said they liked or they didn't like, here's what they wanted more or less of, and could sort of take that into account in putting this year's track together. I'll be doing the same thing going into next year's track. So the DragonCon app is a great way to get us feedback, and is also feedback that the sort of my hires up in DragonCon will get to see as well, so that they can judge whether the stuff that we're doing works or not.
Okay, I have another question that's popular on the Q&A. If you could book anyone, and this is you booking someone that you wish you could to be on your dream panel. They're not showing up necessarily. This is just you. If you could book anyone on your dream panel, who would it be?
Oh wow. Oh gosh. The reason that's hard is that I think of some media folks like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I think would be fascinating, not just to talk about science, but to talk about his journey as a scientist, as I'm always interested in hearing how scientists get to the place where they are in science and that journey, because I think in a lot of cases, people tend to view science as this thing that happens way off somewhere. It's people remotely doing sciencey kinds of things, and it's not obvious how they get there. I think a lot of times hearing people's journeys and their stories about that really help humanize that and help you see that it is a human endeavor when you get right down to it, and it is something that is entirely in people's reach. And I have heard bits and pieces of Neil deGrasse Tyson's journey. I think it's a fabulous one. I love to hear things like that. There are so many different scientists that I would love to see. Some named scientists, people that everybody know. The fact that if I could get Brian Greene, I think he's fascinating. I would love to hear him talk at a panel like this. There are a lot of folks and that I'd like to see sort of in the wider scientific community, people who are doing science communication kind of stuff. This is, of course, the point where I blank on everyone. So what I would say is tweet at me. I can point you to so many cool people, and I'm going to, over the next couple of years, trying to bring them in and give them a chance to talk about their science and the stuff that they have done. Marilyn McKenna, Ed Yong, folks like that who do a great job of writing about science and talking about science. I'd love to see them in.
Yeah, Dream Panel, the obvious people. You got Neil Tyson, you got Bill Nye, you got. I mean, we can even do like people of the past. Einstein, Tesla. That'd be great.
Yeah, well, and I would love to see folks like that mixed in with people who are less well known, because there are a lot of good people doing a lot of good science and a lot of good science communication. And I think one of the things that I would love to be able to do with the science track is introduce people to those folks doing that work and say, look, here are some really cool people that they will completely expand your mind with science if you will let us have a chance to listen to them.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to take another question here. Are you nervous about this? Your first being your first year as track director, and what are the biggest changes you've made already this year?
Oh gosh, I absolutely am nervous. I have volunteered at DragonCon for a number of years, and I've been involved in the science track, but my volunteer area was different, and it is a very different experience participating on a track and trying to organize a track. So it's a big job, and I don't pretend that it's not occasionally nerve-wracking. But I don't know if you could tell, I'm kind of excited about this. This is one of the things that just really gets me up in the morning, is the chance to talk about science and communicate science. And now they've given me a whole track to do this with. So I'm pretty stoked, even as I am nervous. I don't know that I've made a tremendous amount of change in terms of the track as a whole. What I've tried to do is sort of broaden and diversify some of the topics that we're doing. I'm trying to broaden and diversify the kinds of speakers that we've got coming in. I'm a physicist, so when I think science, I tend to think physics. I've kind of had to push back against that and say, no, there's a much wider world of science out there that needs to be represented. I want to make sure that I'm bringing in women and people of color to talk about science, because I think oftentimes that's underrepresented. And if all you see are older white dudes talking about science, then you think that's what you have to do science. And there are so many amazing scientists and folks out there who are not. I want everyone to have a chance to see them and hear from them, and realize that science is an endeavor that everybody can take part in.
That's another great segue, because one of the questions were, are there many female speakers in this science track this year? And you've already highlighted a couple of them, but do you have any more that you could highlight?
Yeah, so I had mentioned Annalee Newitz, Mika McKinnon, who has been around DragonCon for a number of years. She was the science advisor for the Stargates. She's a geologist, an amazing, very knowledgeable, awesome with the science, awesome on panels. We're bringing in Rachel Burks, Dr. Rubidium. She's a chemist who, one of her things went viral earlier this year, where she came up with what would be the chemical concoction for a zombie cologne. So the apocalypse has happened, the zombies are out there. How do you make yourself smell so dead that the zombies won't pay attention to you? And so she went through the actual chemistry of it and said, here's how you will put all of these kinds of things together. I encourage folks to go and take a look at our schedule, our draft schedule that's up on the website. You can see, we've got men, we've got women, we've got just a wide variety of folks who are going to be talking on the track. I'm very excited about it.
All right, I think I'll just take one more question here, and that probably wrap up our questions. Will space, NASA topics be included in the science track this year, or is this a whole separate track? And this kind of goes along with you working with space again, space track. But can you talk about that?
I can. One of the things that I try to be mindful of is that we do have a whole separate track for space. We have a whole separate track for makers robotics. Right. We've got a whole separate track for skeptics and skepticism and skeptic topics. And these are all sort of complementary, but I don't want to, because science can be one of these amorphous things that can have pieces of all of that. I want to make sure that I'm not sort of the blob of a track that is going to try to absorb tracks all in there. Right. So I try to keep a decent delineation so that there are these space topics and those are being handled on the space track. I don't want to cut into their turf. But there is some back and forth. We've got astronomers who are going to be talking on science panels. We've got some non-space scientists who will be talking on space panels. There is some back and forth. There are joint panels. We certainly all collaborate. But in the end of the day, I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing science topics that are not going to be covered by other tracks, because otherwise they won't be covered. And similarly, if I am covering those other tracks' topics, I'm eating into what they could be doing.
Right. Well, I think this has been a great session. I've had really good time talking to you, and appreciate your time.
Thanks. I've really enjoyed it.
And for all the other viewers out there, next we're trying to hope we're still lining up Q&A segments with other directors. Typically, these will be on the weekends because that's when most of us are somewhat free and can. But we don't have exactly who we're going to talk to next. But be on lookout probably Monday, and we will have something to announce then on another Q&A session. And I appreciate everybody giving questions this time. And I look forward to hoping that all of you will continue to watch the next segment. So, Stephen, again, thank you.
You bet. Y'all have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.